Hi, Michael Rosen, Chief Investment Officer of NorthStar Advisory Group. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my background and the investment team and process. So, I've been investing money for close to 3 decades. I started on the institutional side of the business in asset management at firms like JP Morgan, Bear Stearns, and ING back in the late 90s. I developed an investment philosophy that combines both quantitative and fundamental disciplines that allows us to search for opportunities on behalf of our clients. That process basically starts on the quantitative side by looking at hundreds of different companies through different factors. And these factors really start out looking at things like business momentum. How are businesses growing their earnings or their revenue or cash flow? Are these companies improving some of those metrics? And, we'll look at things like estimate revisions relative to how analysts are actually measuring this stuff. We'll look at price activity and how these stocks are actually trading in the open market. Other factors, things like valuation and trying to measure how companies are actually being valued. Again, looking at their earnings, cash flow, revenue, book value, so on and so forth. And then there are other things that we're looking at adjacent to those factors, things on the quality side. So measuring things like we like to call shareholder yield, which actually looks at how many shares a company is actually buying back of their shares, or what kind of dividend they're actually paying to investors. Looking at things like margins and risk characteristics. So we marry all those things together. We generate quantitative ranks. And my team is basically broken out from a sector perspective, looking deep inside of all these sectors and industries to help find the best businesses that we think are ultimately investable for our clients in building these portfolios. Once we go through the quantitative and fundamental analysis, we actually bring technical analysis. And for those of you who don't know technical analysis is looking at charts. Just basic things like support and resistance. So for instance, let's say we identify Microsoft as a company that we believe has a good quantitative and fundamental discipline that we decide that we want to be an investor in. And let's say that Microsoft stock has traded at, let's just say $500 6 times in the last 6 months, but it can't seem to get above $500. Well, if me and the analyst actually made a determination to say, hey, we think we want to actually invest in Microsoft, we would most likely wait for price action to actually break through what we would call that resistance before we would actually start to add to that position or actually add that position into the portfolios. Same goes with selling stocks. A lot of times we'll continue to look at all these different disciplines for, how is price action performing? Have the fundamentals actually changed? And what's happening from a quantitative perspective. My team is evaluating these things by looking at things like news flow on a day-to-day basis. They are listening to the quarterly earnings calls that each one of these management teams basically give. And we're also looking at all the other macro aspects that would ultimately have an impact into these different businesses and industries and sectors that we basically invest in, not only in the United States, but also across the entire world amongst these areas that we want to invest in. So some of those macro factors would be things like political trends or interest rate trends or commodity trends, or just, how is the consumer ultimately doing at this point in time? As we factor all these things together, we basically build portfolios that we believe are decently diversified, but not too overly diversified, that we're going to diversify any of that return away that will mitigate some good performance over time. We also look at risk management, sizing of positions, how much weighting we put in certain sectors or certain countries. And we build that portfolio effectively amongst a handful of different risk tolerances, or what we like to call risk-based portfolios. We're constantly evaluating all these ideas and basically figuring out how to best position these portfolios to work in all different types of markets. Again, not only through stocks, but also through bonds. Within the bond market, we're basically looking at things like credit through corporate bonds, municipal bonds, or treasuries, sometimes mortgages. And we're basically spreading what we like to say duration, which basically measures, how long of a rate lock you basically want to have in relation to the portfolio. And again, making sure that the bond portfolios for the clients who have stocks and bonds measure well with the overall stock portfolios that come together. So hopefully that was a little helpful on my background, and a little bit about our NorthStar investment process. Thank you for watching and getting to know me. If you have any questions further about the investment process or team, please feel free to reach out to me or someone else on the team. Thanks again.